Welcome to The Full Story, Krishani. This is your first time.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. And Patrick, welcome as well.
Thank you.
You're an old hand now.
Old hand, done it once. What could possibly go wrong?
Oh, my goodness. Well, on that note, talking about what could possibly go wrong, we're going to talk about the federal election. We're going to answer some listener and reader questions. But first, I just want to ask both of you before we get stuck in. We're approaching the end of this campaign. If you had to describe it in one word, what word would that be?
I'm going to go with unreal, and not in a good way. I feel like it's kind of been a funny thing but there just feels like there's so much going on in the world and in Australia that's important. There's these big changes. The whole global economy is being, threatened by the Trump's trade war. And, here at home, we're just coming out of this massive inflation environment. We're trying to think, what can we do to get ourselves out of the hole of the last 3 years? And it feels like we're in a bit of a moment in history. And this campaign and what the parties have brought to it really feel a little bit
It's almost like
unreal.
We've been going through the motions to get there. What about you, Krishani?
I think my answer sort of complements what you're saying. Mine would be underwhelming. And I know that it's something that other people in the gallery have also felt, that like the pictures aren't particularly exciting. There's not a lot of inspiration that we've been feeling. Like it's not been particularly dramatic or overwhelming. I would say it's been a little bit underwhelming so far.
Mine would be interminable. It's dragged, but that's because it feels like it started in January. So I think
it does.
The shadow campaign. So I feel like we're ready. We're done. Let's vote. But you know what? This Q&A is not going to be interminable. This is going to be really
we're going to be the highlight.
So let's get into it. And then at the end, we are going to get into a lightning round. Okay, so we did put a call out. We got a lot of questions. So we've picked a few that we have time for today. We're going to start with the voting system. And this one is from Ellen. And Ellen says, we're paraphrasing here, people keep telling me if I vote Greens first and Labor second, that I'm taking a vote away from Labor and giving my vote to Peter Dutton. I'm confused, quote unquote. So Ellen is basically asking, if a voter puts their preferred party or candidate first on the lower house ballot and that candidate doesn't get in, what happens to their vote afterwards?
Yeah, it's a really good question and something that I know a lot of people have been concerned about. So if we look at what preferential voting is, if we sort of go down to the basics of it, you have, say, for example, 8 candidates on a ballot and you're voting them in your preference from 1 to 8. When preferential voting takes place, there are a whole bunch of rounds. So sometimes it might only be one round. So for example, Anthony Albanese said just this week that he is always elected on first round preferences. So even if the Labor Party is saying they're preferencing the Greens in second, it doesn't matter because he always wins or has always won on that first round of preferences. So his preferences don't go anywhere. However, where this does matter is where you have a much tighter election race.
Right.
So in that first round, the candidate that has the least number ones on the ballots, they get eliminated, and then their preferences, so their ballots where the number 2 vote is, that then gets distributed to the rest of the candidates, and then that keeps going all the way until you get one candidate that has 50%. What that really means is that it's still important, and it's not throwing a vote away necessarily, but it does depend on the situation. Where this gets a little bit more complicated is when you have a 3-way race between, say, Labor, Liberal and Greens. That's when those preferences the sort of impact changes in a way, because it means that like sometimes if the Greens did have more preferences in that 3-way race, then that might actually knock Labor out, and then those preferences would be distributed, right, and then that could lead to the Greens or the Liberals being elected.
So it pays to look at your electorate and see how tight the contest is, basically.
Absolutely.
So let's go to Heem's question, more to do with the Senate ballot. Heem wants to know, when people number the individual candidates below the line for the Senate, how does the counting work? So as opposed to when people just number the parties above the line.
I'll start with above the line because it's easier. So if you vote above the line, you put 1 for the Liberal Party, 2 for the Labor Party. the Liberal Party, for example, has 3 Senate candidates. They basically become your first 3 preferences. So when they're counting the ballots, they get the first 3, and then you've put Labor in second, they get the next ones. So that's the way that above the line works. When you go below the line, it goes to whichever candidate you select. So you could, for example, decide that you actually want the third candidate who's third down the list in the Liberal Party's sort of part of their ballot. So your vote would go directly to them first rather than who the Liberal Party has nominated as their top candidate. So that can make a big difference.
This is an interesting one about energy policy because it sort of suggests that location, local issues can really come into play in this election. So Seth is from the Hunter region in New South Wales and says the coalition has proposed the Hunter Valley as a possible nuclear site. Seth wants to know what energy policy would be better for the local economy there in terms of jobs, given the area is currently reliant on coal.
So there's a few ways to look at it. To start with, history isn't full of examples where coal mining areas has successfully transitioned to new economy type jobs. I mean, you look at the Appalachians, because those were coal mining areas that, were pretty much forgotten. The coal mines went, the economy changed, and they have this entrenched poverty, and they've created this kind of, and it's part of the story of Trump, right? It's part of the story of a white working class men who have been left behind. So I just want to preface this with the Hunter obviously is a very, there's lots of coal mining around there. It's a really big earner. I've been to towns quite a bit around there actually for family reasons. And so it will be difficult. And so we shouldn't be under any illusions. If you get told that, it's going to be great, you're going to get easy, there's going to be jobs galore, we're going to retrain. History suggests that's going to be very difficult and it's going to require a lot of effort. So people really need to keep pushing their politicians about this. It's not going to just happen. It's not going to be an easy thing.
You have to really, a government really has to focus on it.
A government really has to focus on it. And even then it's difficult. So that's another point to make. Now, the last one, which energy one is better, right? So you look at, you've got a renewable energy push, we can put in which is well in train, it's well established. Hundreds of billions of dollars going into it, a lot of private sector investment, works to our comparative advantage nationally. And so it, in as much as anything's going to be helpful to transition people away from coal, if we do see coal mining ending about mid-2030s or something, then that looks like a best option. Because I would say that because nuclear, it still feels like a bit of a fantasy. It still doesn't feel like it's going to happen.
It's because renewables is already a little bit established, basically.
Oh, a little bit, massively established. Yeah, no, it's a global.
Also just so far down the timeline.
So far down
it's
that
really,
path.
really far away.
Yeah, and the money keeps pouring in. So it's, and it's going to be difficult and it's going to be expensive and all those things. So I can't get away from the fact that you can't compare these two policies, nuclear versus renewables, on a like for like when it comes to Hunter. Because I just can't believe.
One is still theoretical, basically.
One is so theoretical. We've still got a ban on, kind of nuclear power.
Yeah, there are so many kind of hurdles that you need to get over.
So many hurdles.
I think it's interesting because even though Peter Dutton hasn't said, or rather he said that he would continue and the Liberal Party coalition would continue to support nuclear even if they lose this next election. I mean, that sort of puts the timeline out even further, which would mean that more coal-fired power stations would have to be extended for longer, and it just it's quite a complicating factor.
Yeah, but I think if you are someone in the Hunter who doesn't want coal mining to go and you want to keep your great job, fixing big trucks or whatever you're doing, or the businesses depend on them, then you look at the two options and go, you know what, I wouldn't mind them doing this nuclear thing if it keeps coal open longer, which it will, which is kind of the...
Yeah, because nuclear is going to take so long to be established. The coal mines will keep working.
And it's almost like that's the goal, perhaps?
Yeah, so it's like what is the best in the short term for your local area versus what is the best for the long term. This is a fascinating one. This is from Matthias asking whether the issue of corporate tax avoidance or corporations not paying enough tax, whether that issue is cutting through to voters? Now, we want to answer this in two phases. Patrick, if you can just start us off by giving us an idea of how much tax large corporations actually pay in this country.
I can give you the total corporation tax, which is about $135 billion.
It's a lot.
For this financial year. It's a lot. Income tax is about $335 billion. So, we collect a lot of tax from companies, for sure. Yeah.
So Krishani, I mean, the Greens talk a bit about a super profits tax. Is there an appetite or a feeling that we should be collecting even more tax revenue from corporations amongst Australians? Do you feel like that's cutting through?
I mean, not necessarily through to the public, particularly at the moment when the issues are so sort of localised to the household budget. I think that, like, when you look at a lot of the polling that's taken place, and maybe part of this is because those measures aren't always taken, but when you do look at the kind of trend of polling that we're seeing and the questions that are asked and the sort of reporting around that, it's very much focused on the household level, who's doing more for cost of living support, who's doing more for energy support, rather than necessarily should we be doing more on tax at that kind of larger level. I think, like
That's
what Labor has
interesting.
done.
So we think kind of small local household level rather than big picture at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's sort of evident within the amount of stress that people are feeling. And so, you might find that people, are sort of more focused within and getting by day, rather than that big picture tax policy. And I mean, I think it's kind of evident as well in the fact that we haven't really had a lot of this conversation during the election campaign. Like, if it was something that obviously major parties or minor parties will have an idea of, what they want to talk about or what they think will cut through. And sometimes that doesn't cut through, but it's definitely something that we haven't heard during this election campaign. And even the Greens, who, as you said, have been pushing for like a super profits tax, have been very much more focused on getting dental into Medicare and environmental reform this election campaign.
Yeah, that speaks to that argument that there's been a lack of big picture reforms in this election. It's been very kind of small fry.
There's been big ticket spending ideas.
Less on the sort of big reform.
Yeah, and also how to pay for those things as well.
Gerard is asking, why does the Prime Minister need to have a, quote, swank house with harbour views in Sydney at all? End quote. Gerard says, why not sell it and have the residence of the PM be a truly federal one in the national capital at the Lodge? Now, you're both in Canberra. I feel like you'll have some feelings about this.
Well, I'm a Sydney-sider, so I've grown up kind of seeing Kirribilli House here and there on the harbour. I mean, so I did a bit of a Google last night because I didn't know why we even had Kirribilli House. But it was acquired, it was built in the late 1800s, it was acquired around 1920. And it was basically to be like a not an official residence, but more an official kind of diplomatic home for people, overseas leaders, foreign kind of diplomatic missions that were coming to, have hospitality and that kind of thing.
To show off how lovely it all looks.
Yeah, and often they will come to Sydney, right? Like whenever there is a foreign leader that comes, they'll generally come to Sydney and has until sort of recently had the biggest population, lots of diversity across Sydney. And so then, you would sort of expect that there's a dinner or some sort of reception at Kirribilli House. Albo lives in the Lodge, but the last few Prime Ministers, John Howard, Tony Abbott, Scott Morrison, all lived in Kirribilli House because they were from Sydney, and the sort of prevailing thought from them was that their kids want to continue to go to school in Sydney, etc.
It was disdain
They were established
for Canberra.
there.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
It was a slap in the face. I remember my dad was shocked and horrified.
Really?
Yeah.
How was it Howard? That Howard
I guess
didn't
it was
locate
Howard,
himself?
Yeah, that he wasn't living here.
But I mean, Peter Dutton's tapped into this, hasn't he? Because he said, I'd quite like a bit of harbour view. I don't want to live in the Lodge.
This one's so interesting because the other Prime Ministers were actually from Sydney and so had a kind of tangential argument as to why they might stay in Sydney. But Peter Dutton has no connection to Sydney. His kids, who I think are all out of school at this point anyway, but he's from Queensland. And so it's kind of... saving for a house that he may or may not support. But the sort of whole Dutton argument is a lot stranger because he's not from Sydney.
There's
and
not
he's
a reason.
saying he'd prefer Sydney over Canberra.
Cultural war.
Yeah.
I feel like the strong reaction was also partly cost of living. Like, well, we'd all love to have harbour views if we could. But the answer to Gerard's question is it's meant to be a place to welcome foreign dignitaries, to sort of show off Australia.
Yeah,
I
pretty
mean,
much.
otherwise, where would you do it? I mean,
The lodge.
yeah, but if they're coming to Sydney, I mean,
Then, yeah, it'd be a lot harder.
yeah,
The lodge isn't as pretty.
It's not as, it doesn't have the harbour view, does it? I think it kind of boils down to that.
the lodge is nice.
Yeah,
I'd live there.
I'd live there.
So Patrick and Krishani, before we get into our lightning round, I just want to ask you, I know we've said this sort of campaign has dragged a little bit, it's been a bit underwhelming, but do you have kind of your most funny, memorable moments so far?
I think mine are less funny and more memorable, but I wrote a little list down. I've got being called hate media as a particularly memorable moment.
Yeah.
You know, and Peter Dutton calling Guardian and the ABC most notably hate media. That was one of mine. I don't know why it turned into such. I mean, I do. It's because Albo kind of wouldn't say that he fell off the stage, but the stage is kind of a memorable, turned funny, turned ridiculous moment. Stagegate of the campaign.
What about you, Patrick?
Well, I'm a pretty superficial guy, so I do like a gotcha question at a debate. I did like the eggs. I enjoyed the eggs.
The eggs. Explain for people who didn't see the debate. The eggs.
So they did the debate, and they had the great one of, well, how much is a dozen eggs? And Dutton guessed $4.
Yeah, $4.20.
Which makes me laugh. And then I think the host luckily said, "Oh, geez,
Double that.
More like double that." And I was like, "Thank God."
So he said $7, which I thought was
$7.
interesting because they literally said double. So if I was Alba, I would have said 8. But you know.
Oh no!
But then he added to save himself. I would say, if you can find them, because it is true.
That was clever.
Yeah, and the great thing about this too was, you know how like Polly's always like, they pivot, right? You ask them one question, they say, "I'll tell you what I do know," blah, blah. And you're like, that's not what I asked, but okay. And so someone said, what about some question about eggs? And I said, "I'll tell you what I do know about eggs." I just thought, wow.
Okay, so first of all, we've only got a few questions. Let's get into them. Which Tasmanian senator pulled out a prop on Sky News to criticise the major party's housing policies?
Was it Jackie Lambie?
Yes! Double points. What was the prop?
Oh, I feel like I watched this, but I can't remember.
Do you want to phone a friend?
Would love to phone a friend.
Thinking Harry Potter.
Oh, it was a wand, a magic stick.
Triple points. What other candidate, leader of a party, pulled out a giant prop?
Oh,
Fish, salmon.
No, oh, well, yeah, but I was going to say Adam Bant with the toothbrush.
The toothbrush, the giant toothbrush. That's right. Oh.
What about the salmon?
That
was before the election.
All right, I'll give you a couple of points for that.
Oh,
no. Yeah, totally disqualified.
I'll give you a point for that, Patrick.
A pity point. That's what I'm after.
All right, this is the final one, and it's perfect for us as we're in the last week of the election campaign. What did the Prime Minister say he would be doing on the day after the election? Here's some options. Spending time with his dog Toto, going to a Rabbitohs game, or watching Star Wars.
Oh, he's going to be watching Star Wars.
It's Star Wars. It's May the 4th. May the 4th be with you.
With you. Yeah. Ah, that's perfect. What are you guys going to be doing?
Sleeping.
You'll be sleeping. It'll just be another day for me. I think another day in paradise in Canberra.
That's
day just a little message to our leaders.
FYI, it's the lodge, not Kirribilli. On that note, Krishani and Patrick, thank you so much for your time answering listener questions and some of our own as well.
Thanks.
Thank you.
It's been fun.